This video is sponsored by Knuckles OX, Baba Snake, Julio the Boy, Blazing Darkness G, and Danny Mash X. If you'd like to directly support my content, as well as catch it early, have your name credited as a sponsor, or maybe even have your What If Ideas produce its commissions, consider visiting the links to my Patreon and such in the description below. Our story this time would for the most part begin within the first 4 years after the ending of the Cell Saga, and just past the middle of the 7-year time skip before the Buu Saga. So far, the timeline has seen no differences from canon really. Goku is off training in the other world. Gohan has gotten well into focusing solely on his studies. Vegeta has taken up a great few binge-worthy shows along with his vow to never fight again. And Piccolo has been left to diligently training alone, as one of the Z fighters who unfortunately has simply been left behind on account of not being a Saiyan. And this is where we would find the first titular character of this What If, meditating and thinking about all these things, up on the lookout, along with Dende and Mr. Popo. Despite his stoic and lonely nature, the Namekian has by this point become rather nostalgic for what could be considered the good old days, back when he had dedicated training partners with shared goals to break through their limits together. Though to be fair, in most of those times, they had some goal to work towards. While Piccolo has come to have a deep fondness in his heart for both the new guardian of Earth and his genie attendant, they're pacifists by nature, and seldom are eager to train their bodies as much as their minds in a healthy balance. To put it bluntly, they aren't Gohan, who he'd likely be missing quite fiercely as a companion just as much as a training partner. At this point, he would even appreciate Chaozu or Yajirobe, and Piccolo could certainly go and see Gohan anytime he wanted to, but it's just not the same as it used to be. Despite him enjoying the peace of this time too, he's beginning to get bored. If you think about it like he would be right now in this story, Piccolo Jr. spent the first 8 years of his life being completely self-reliant, self-motivated, and self-interested. Then, he was forced to learn caretaking on top of teaching skills to be a master to Gohan for a year, and Gohan in turn was just as equally a master in teaching Piccolo how to show affection and loyalty in ways that aren't inherently violent. Then after giving his life in the battle with the Saiyans, he spent half a year on King Kai's with all the other Z fighters at the time but Goku and Krillin, who just so happened to also be the ones he fought and kind of got to know during the 23rd tourney anyway. So spending time around and being forced to train alongside Tien, Yamcha, and Chaozu was another extremely valuable experience for Piccolo in ways that impacted his mentality and character just as much as his power. Even though for the most part, Piccolo is depicted and seems to still be as standoffish as ever with everyone. It's kind of their subtext. All these characters had something in common finally, and that all 4 of them died in the Saiyan invasion because of the bonds, friendship, and faith they placed in each other. Yamcha stuck his neck out against the Cybermen first because Krillin and Chaozu had died before. Chaozu and Tien died to save and honor each other respectively, and Piccolo died because his love for Gohan overcame his cold hard logic to preserve his own life as inherently valuable. I would even go so far as to personally headcanon that Piccolo simply pondering these things in his meditation and image training under the 10 times gravity of King Kai's planet was part of how he got such massive gains rather than just needing to physically spar. Those epiphanies leading to focus and mindfulness, which just so happened to also lead to power in the process. After King Kai's though, Piccolo had the absolutely wild experience of fusing with a fellow Namekian and taking on a genocidal ruler who attempted to conquer his people. Something else, which obviously led to a major widening of perspective and self-awareness alongside power. Then after this, the 3 years he spends preparing for the androids, after hearing the messenger from the future, Trunks is warning firsthand with his heightened hearing. We also see Piccolo go through what is to date his longest period of dedicated training alongside designated training and sparring partners, as he would spend his time with Goku and Gohan, and arguably from how powerful he became even before feuding with Kami, this is also some of the most beneficial, productive, and likely fun/entertaining training Piccolo would have ever undergone, especially if we look at the expanded versions of it, through stuff like filler in movies, where we just see that these 3 got along super duper well, and arguably always have had great chemistry in and out of battle, ever since they technically defeated Raditz together. So it's actually not that big of a surprise that the trio also represent one of the best examples in the franchise of the benefits of training partners. After reuniting with Kami and undergoing his final major shift in the Z era of the story, Piccolo would kind of see the opposite end of that kind of training in the Time Chamber, as undertaking the extra 1 year's training alone, even if it gave great solitude for meditation, most assuredly hampered the growth that Piccolo could have experienced before going to face Cell again, in a way that will probably be a harsh reminder of the lesson that the Buddhist-like society of the Namekians exemplifies. Cooperation and working with the collective in mind will always lead to better outcomes than a focus on self-enrichment, prosperity, and empowerment. In this spirit, I think Piccolo would find himself pondering who he could recruit as a training partner now, having likely kept loose tabs on everyone's whereabouts and progress, just for his own curiosity. He'd therefore likely conclude Tien and Chaozu as his best bets out of the Earthlings, as Krillin has been busy courting Android 18, while Yamcha has seemingly retired from martial arts and taken back up his interest in some sport. He considers Master Roshi and Yajirobe for a moment, but concludes it not worth it due to their eccentricities. However, he rather unfortunately concludes that Chaozu and Tien may be better backup options, as what he really needs right now, if he wants to even think about those levels of power Goku, Cell, and Gohan were fighting with and controlling, then he's going to need a training partner at that level as well, which pretty inevitably leads him to needing a Saiyan, even if he doesn't like it. Sadly, as mentioned earlier, Piccolo will be well aware that options there are limited. Dende is too young and inexperienced to take him to the checkout station, and that sibling of Muten Roshi can only revive fighters for a single day, so Son Goku is unfortunately a no-go, even though he is likely already surpassed any scale of power that Piccolo can currently conceive of. And speaking of no-goes, as is Vegeta, even if he were willing to train with Piccolo. After all, his whining and self-pity may become more unbearable than Gohan's ever was. And on that subject, his former disciple is also, as mentioned earlier, far too distracted and absorbed in his studies. And it's already clear he's beginning to lose the very power that Piccolo is coveting on account of not using it. If anything, the Super Namekian would need to spend more time whipping him back into shape than benefiting from having a training partner whose aim is to bring him up to their level. Wait, what about future Trunks? Sure, it would require time travel, but if he remembers correctly from Kami's memories, higher-level gods have access to some way of messing with time. And even the Lookout is equipped with a room that can peer through and simulate training encounters throughout time and space, so it's merely another really good option, which will take a bit of effort. But by that metric, Piccolo will be better off just going and getting the baby Trunks who was born here in the present timeline a few years ago, and training him up like he once did Gohan. That's actually not too bad an idea, seeing as how he should be around the same age before he began training Gohan at. Like Goku, Vegeta won't care since as a Saiyan, he surely can't be the kind of helicopter parent that Chi-Chi is, and he knows for certain that Bulma isn't either, due to how brave and or reckless the genius is. Now that he thinks about it some more, Piccolo even remembers Gohan mentioning something about being even more busy now that he had a little brother to help Chi-Chi with, and if the math checked out, he wouldn't be much younger than Trunks either. With a cunning scheme brewing, Piccolo would set off to see how things will work out, still keeping some of his backup options in mind as he heads towards Mount Paozu and his largest obstacle. Arriving at Gohan's house, he'd find it to be just a bit louder than it would have been in some of his prior visits, since there now happens to be a 3-year-old brat who is the spitting image of Goku darting around and playing, displaying a pretty immense and exhausting amount of energy in the process. Landing at the door and knocking, he'd be first met with Chi-Chi, who's expecting our youngest, and then disapprovingly calls out to Gohan to say it's for him. With both the mother and the honorary man of the house in front of him now, Piccolo can rather calmly and reasonably lay out his thought process, since he knows for certain Gohan will at least hear him out and think on things. Once proposed though, Chi-Chi would of course be mortified at the idea, both on account of the fighting and the impact this could have in turning Goten into a delinquent as well, as this would also most likely be before she herself tried to train Goten. However, I think here, Piccolo could employ some craftiness by just telling the truth and making a good argument, citing that unlike Son Goku who had Master Roshi, Gohan's first teacher was him, and he pretty much personally saw to it that Goku's child would grow to be almost nothing like his father, aside from that astounding strength. If anything, Piccolo is one of the main reasons Gohan isn't a delinquent as Chi-Chi says, even having originally been the one to point out the issue in Goku's plan to defeat Cell. So if he's allowed to take care of Goten now, he can basically do so again, making sure that Goten grows a lot more like Gohan than Goku. And in the process, he can also remove some of the burden on the two of them, which would better allow Gohan time to focus on his studies, and maybe even hopefully find the time to train and exercise again in Piccolo's opinion. To this point, I think Gohan would actually back Piccolo up pretty readily, citing he makes a very salient point. And what's more, a bit of the Saiyan in him may get excited at the idea of Goten getting stronger under Piccolo's tutelage like he once did, so that one day he can fight his little brother himself and test his strength. The idea could even make him want to train a little bit, though he's smart enough to leave that part out. Ultimately, I believe Chi-Chi would ponder things for at least a couple of days, but in the end would likely agree, seeing more upsides than downsides, and recognizing that Piccolo is not the same demon now who had once tried to brutally kill her fiancé in front of her. Meanwhile, in that time, Piccolo would have likely already approached Bulma at Capsule Corp and had a much easier time with things there, as I really doubt Bulma would want to turn down a free nanny, richest woman on Earth or not. Also, Trunks is already starting to turn into a little bit of a brat compared to his future version, so I'm sure that Bulma would also appreciate the help in reining him in. Beyond that, when Vegeta does get a chance to have his 2 cents in the conversation, he isn't really interested enough to hear, though Piccolo is at least happy to see that he seems to at least be exercising and somewhat training regularly at least. It's better than Gohan is the point. This sees us finding ourselves finally in a serene mountainscape near Knight's Pond, which Piccolo will eventually go on to claim as his home, and even magically materialize his own house at. But for now, it serves at the point that the newly appointed nanny Piccolo brings his charges to after picking them up. He would have taken them to the Lookout, but the Kami in him balks at the balking towards tradition. Upon truly meeting Goten and Trunks for the first time, Piccolo will be happy to see that they are great friends already, which means he at least doesn't have to deal with any immature squabbling, or at least not a ton. But Piccolo likely wouldn't be happy to see that they each lack even a fraction of the discipline, shyness, and manners that kid Gohan had. Well, Goten kinda does when not following Trunks' lead, but Trunks really is notably nothing like the version of himself which grew up in such hard times, just like Bulma had said. However, after having done all that thinking, pondering, experiencing, and growing on his journey as a Namekian, warrior, individual, and part of the community that is the Z-Fighters, I think Piccolo could really easily adapt to this, and better yet, get himself on a wavelength where he can understand and truly get along with the boys. I'm talking that same kind of connection with young Gohan, where it was clear that even though there was a slight power gap and age gap, the two friends developed a deep and genuine respect for one another. So I think Piccolo would truly try to get on the boys' level. Little things like instead of constantly and harshly insisting they spar and meditate all the time, he does stuff like trying out Trunks' video game sometimes. Maybe even getting unnaturally good, since he has such a well-suited mind for rules and tactics and strategies, which is something that could easily earn Trunks' respect in a way that even Vegeta would be unable to. And by proxy, that'd be earning Goten's respect as well. However, I think Piccolo could do this in any way by simply taking an interest in what the boys do. If they like a particular TV show, maybe he tries to give it a watch. He likely would hate it, but the thought would count, and it would again show he is trying to respect their interests, which would naturally elicit some in his. Also, just a fun aside, magic materialization would be absolutely awesome for creating like custom toys or figurines, which I'm sure the boys could have a ton of fun with. Like imagine Piccolo making a bunch of Warhammer miniatures or character statues for a D&D game he plays with them. That would be both incredibly cute and wholesome, but also moments I could see meaning a lot to all three of them, just like that talk Piccolo and Gohan had over the campfire about how Goku didn't think Junior was all that bad. If Piccolo could do even just a little bit of that and keep that energy up, I think he could easily establish a bond of master and disciple with Goten and Trunks, far before the Buu Saga, where he would also be challenged to do so naturally, and would pretty much fail hilariously at it. The most interesting question here though becomes how much could this new bond really change in only 3 years before the Buu Saga, and there honestly may be a perfect way to answer that before directly rushing into it just yet. But for now, I think the obvious implications should be discussed. Number 1, Piccolo, Trunks, and Goten would all get stronger than in canon. Duh. But by how much really depends on how creative, wacky, or in-depth you want to get with things. Like on the surface level, we do have the hard fact that Piccolo would likely be the one to discover the boys can become Super Saiyans at far younger ages and with far more ease than any he's ever seen before, which also denotes a higher level potential than any he's seen as of yet as well. So that alone could easily see Piccolo inspired to take the boys through the same training undergone by the Saiyans and the Android Saga, in order to give them access to the higher grades of Super Saiyan, along with mastery, and hopefully a power beyond it in the form of Super Saiyan 2, making them even better training partners in the process. Actually, this would mean the combination of the three of them training together would be logically more intense and harder training than what any other Saiyan or just plain warrior in the universe is undergoing currently, including Goku. But to be fair, that's because most people are also training by themselves at this point. But that alone could have a ton of changes, not even looking at the other factors. And our number 2 obvious factor is that there is a lot of, in a way, procedural or just kind of initiatory stuff that Piccolo could take the boys through, just viewing it as a necessary experience that one has to go through as a member of the Z-Fighters. Stuff like climbing Korin's tower and training with the cat for the potential unlocking Ultra Divine Water, training under Mr. Popo or against perfect dolls of themselves, or even better yet, inside the Pendulum Room, so that way they can relive all the famous battles they missed so far, from the showdowns at the World Martial Arts tournaments and against the original Demon King Piccolo, all the way to the recent events of the Cell games, and Gohan's battle against the titular Bio-Android Ultimate Lifeform. Seeing them fight with, against, and trained alongside tons of different heroes from history. Significant ones like Kid Goku, who Goten would be an absolute shock and awe to meet, or even the battles of the future Trunks, who present Trunks would be in a similar place of admiration for. Beyond this, there is also the time chamber itself, which he could easily decide to have them use earlier, but as it is peacetime, that feels unlikely. He could very easily lose his nanny privileges if he brings the boys back a year older. What there is as another very easy option, however, is Vegeta's gravity chamber, which I'm sure Trunks would already be curious about. And I could easily see Piccolo being interested in either flaunting the power he and the boys had begun to develop together, or very sneakily deciding to keep it on the low, just so they can surprise Gohan and Vegeta as much as possible, and hopefully give them the shocks they need to get back into their training seriously, as we do know from Superhero that Piccolo likes to be just a bit manipulative. And by the way, if we are mentioning the Ultra Divine Water, we should also mention the concept of Elder Guru's potential unlock, which Piccolo could also be reminded of, and could also view as heavily beneficial for the boys, considering just how much hidden potential they have. And while at it, he may as well get something like that done for himself, which alone has very heavy implications. That would also run Piccolo into asking Dende about this a lot sooner, and in the process learning more about it, which could pretty easily initiate a Dragon Ball hunt, just for the sake of unlocking their potential through Shenron, or even giving Dende the ability to unlock potentials while he is still young. But either or, hunting the Dragon Balls would be another kind of rite of passage as a Z-Warrior Piccolo could take the boys through, and not to mention, it's fun, and is something which could also have monstrous consequences far before the Buu Saga arrives. And finally, I think it should just be mentioned that these three characters, and by proxy Gotenks, as he is the fusion of Goten and Trunks, would also vibe remarkably well in a longer form of dedicated training, because they are each some of the most creative fighters in the entire Dragon Ball franchise when it comes to different and unique ways to apply, control, and weaponize ki, as they each have a ton of named attacks and techniques and different ways to use them. So it almost goes without saying, but the brainstorm sessions, image training, and tweaking of a lot of the cool super moves that Goten and Trunks naturally come up with already would not only be dialed up to about a 50 probably, but would also be highly refined and disciplined by Piccolo and his teaching style. And finally, not to mention that as a fused being himself, and with a pre-established connection as a teacher to the boys, Piccolo in this verse would be pretty uniquely equipped to help Goten and Trunks truly master and possibly even evolve fusion. Maybe even through a myriad of different types of fusion, rather than just with the easily messed up Metamoran dance. There are truly endless ways to go about and interpret how something like this would turn out, and how it would affect the other characters both in terms of our heroes and our villains. I first want to know your thoughts on what we have so far though. Is anyone deeply out of character here? Can this really change all that much, or will it change too much? Can a scenario that starts so late in the timeline really even change too much? And because of that late start in the timeline, and the fact that we would even technically have stuff like Daima, GT, and Super to add to it, I'm super excited to see how this one could develop further out. Welcome back to the channel, Plus Ultraman. It's witty greeting to the audience, and we're getting back to our story of Piccolo training Goten and Trunks early, which you can catch part 1 of here, as it's very important context, because, first and foremost, we have to talk about what's cut from part 1, or part 0, on account of how much of it was theory crafted, versus an actual narrative so far, at least partially or not in my usual style of doing so. So firstly, as it was a bit understated in part 1, the focus on the development of young Goten and Trunks, in order to continue stimulating his own training, causes a greater focus and importance from Piccolo in the development of young Dende as well. So we are keeping the 3, or I suppose 4 or 5 man Dragon Ball hunt set during the time skip, along with the wish to give Dende the same level of potential unlocking ability as a grand old Namekian guardian immediately, without having to wait until he is as old as someone like Guru to access it. It should also be stated that Mr. Popo is of note, because he would like to keep up with and be ahead of the Guardian of Earth in terms of power, so he can better serve him. So despite his pacifism, Popo would have the power to back up that filler feat of holding Goten and Trunks in this timeline, especially since true Eldritch horrors could be unleashed if his potential were to be unlocked. Dende would then use his new power to unlock the potential of Piccolo, Trunks, and Goten, in the same way which was done for Krillin and Gohan by Grand Order Guru, which enabled very rapid growth for them during the Namek Saga and beyond. Or, if preferred, you could reasonably interpret this as a way better version of that potential unlocking method, since it's being done by a younger and stronger Namekian than Guru. As a result, Dende may be in a better state to complete the act of bringing out more untapped power. I will say definitively, for the sake of the narrative and its stakes, this doesn't result in any ultimate or mystic form shenanigans, at least not yet, but it does give a major power boost to our MCs of the scenario, independent of what they would get from their actual hard work and training. One which I think a lot of people agreed from part 1 could have fit fairly well even in canon, so these guys weren't so often left behind despite having interesting stuff going on in the Pendulum Room saga. Also, keep in mind, to this point of us not getting an ultimate Piccolo, Goten, or Trunks from this, even though it's said Shenron gave Piccolo the same kind of potential unlocking ritual. Piccolo himself also says that little bit extra the dragon gave him went a long way, and Dende, even if he is better than Guru, can't exactly give anything which would go quite that far by himself. No matter what, it's still a worthwhile boost, which would serve Piccolo's ends greatly, especially if we really do take the benefit of the joke of having a power-awakened Mr. Popo as a training partner and assistant master. And most importantly, while it's simultaneously great for their training, this is also fun and exciting on the boys' end. So we'll also say, for the youthful hybrid Saiyan budding warriors, after their Dende boost, if they were struggling to figure out the ascension of Super Saiyan 2 from the initial point of achieving and then mastering Super Saiyan, then they definitely can get there afterwards, if not with just a bit more hard and intensive work, since anger, after all, may not be their only method to getting to that power beyond Super Saiyan, like a lot of the prior generations of Saiyans seem to use, or at least seem to use out of perceived necessity, thanks to Piccolo's training them earlier and better than in canon, and far more thoroughly than he had a chance to teach Gohan. Goten and Trunks in this timeline won't have nearly as much of their talent squandered or overlooked. In fact, with the progress they've made so far, they can sort of feel out the transformation in terms of the flow of their ki, a lot more in depth and detailed, almost like certain points in their body act as pools or gates for their energy, with the recognition and appreciation of them, and the tingly sensation in the back they induce when focused on, eliciting an easier ascension to the second form of Super Saiyan for them. I think this could be super possible, since Goten and Trunks are exponentially more like Universe 6 Saiyans in how we've seen them develop power-wise, and with the whole S-Cell concept in mind. So this is another point Piccolo could be particularly helpful as a teacher for the boys in, using his wisdom, love of meditation, and discipline and precise ki control, which he would certainly be instilling in them as much as he could. So I could easily see him helping the boys specifically figure out the tingly back thing. I'll say again though, for the sake of stakes in the narrative, they don't just immediately get Super Saiyan 2, as I do appreciate the argument from some that Super Saiyan 2, even recognizing Goten and Trunks' potential, should still take some real effort and adversity to get, just on account of the fact that of the overall power scale and what they are aware of, or interested in reaching the point of the series we're setting the story in right now. So I think that's a fair assessment. But overall, they definitely do have the potential to reach that level, or even higher really, prior to the Buu Saga, both in canon and especially in this timeline. Another thing we're for sure keeping is the fact that this earlier and more effective training would be a major leg up for Piccolo and the boys, even when we strip it of some of the more hack stuff like potential unlocks or immediate transformations. Again, just due to the insane potential of Goten and Trunks, and the fact that it would actually be utilized in the story from the get-go, and at pretty much all times from then on. It's also therefore extremely conservative to say that the boys are about as strong as Gohan at the Cell games when our story really picks up, and therefore their power together as a team is something even more incredible, essentially what it would have been like if Gohan and Cell had teamed up and fought. That comparison is actually apt though, since there would likely be just the slightest difference in power between the two boys, on account of them still having inherited Vegeta and Goku's rivalry to some extent, along with Trunks still being a year older, while Piccolo's fruits of training with the young prodigies, alongside his potential unlock, helps further achieve greater synchronicity with Nail and Kami within him. And like we've discussed earlier in the story, simply meditating and deeper exploring the nature of this bond is incredibly beneficial to Piccolo, and one day soon, it will be to his new students as well. He as the master's gains are so great, to the point that as a necessity for this training, Piccolo as he is now would easily be a match for Super Perfect Cell, Super Saiyan 2 Gohan, or both the monsters of the Cell games at once. Especially after essentially fighting the two so much recently, in his image training, the Pendulum Room, and by proxy, through sparring partners comparable to them, as they would be the most logical and enticing benchmark for him to reach, and solely because of the gold mine of progress and dormant power that is Goten and Trunks. The master of the Demon School actually has a viable method of reaching and exceeding that benchmark. Thus, Piccolo has reached a tier a lot more comparable to some movie bosses from this period of time, easily establishing him as the strongest being on Earth currently, despite him being very low-key about it. But yes, obviously, Goten, Trunks, Piccolo, and even Dende compared to canon get extremely strong, but we will also be keeping the idea that they keep this on the down low. I know there may be some confusion on how that possibly could happen, but again, I feel like one of the few things Piccolo would exemplify and stress overall with his training is proper ki control, focus, and subtlety. So that along with some minor discipline from him, and the excitement to hold back until a good opportunity comes to showcase power is given, would drive them all to hold back on any major showings of strength to the other Z fighters for at least 2 years. While all of this that we've discussed so far has been happening in the background, putting us finally in the plot of the new stuff. 6 years into the time skip, and just before the Great Saiyaman arc will begin, this timeline has another convenient, yet stark difference, and not only recognizing a Z-movie's events, but doing so later in the series than it was originally meant to take place. Here, we'll be shifting the timeline along a bit wonkily to have the events of Bojack Unbound take place now. This, funnily enough, means changing the birthday of a random rich guy's son, as well as delaying the escape from King Kai's planet. So that way, there isn't so long a wait for a tournament to showcase power in. And better yet, it's one which won't exclude Trunks and Goten from competing with all ages, as they'd surely be aiming for contests of strength with Vegeta and Gohan as well, whom Piccolo would also want to face to see how they've improved. Thus, the trio all join in on the intergalactic tournament being held by Mr. Satan, which based on how we play it, could also result in an earlier meeting for some other characters that would also change the timeline some more, with the events of this Bojack Unbound taking place in this context, having our souped up Piccolo, Goten, Trunks, and maybe even Dende and Mr. Popo in the mix, just for the laughs and story opportunity of it. That honestly works really well, since Kid Trunks can fill in for the future Trunks that shouldn't be there. That is, unless he came back specifically for the tournament. You could also really power Gohan and Vegeta up in this context, since even if they don't know exactly everything that's been going on with Piccolo and the boys, they know enough that has made them train more than either would have over the last 6 years in canon. Gohan would also have had, or be just near his growth spurt in this context. Like literally, it's probably the very next day after he goes to sleep type beat. This is also good, because like in canon, the Earthling Z fighters will still enter, and in fact will probably feel even more demotivated to participate, because of the changes in just Gohan and Vegeta. Though that said, even if he has begun training again, Vegeta likely isn't entering. I think the best you could hope for is getting him to come and watch and see how Trunks is going to do, since he probably would be really curious to see how Piccolo has been training him. Not really curious to put the effort or time into investigating, but you know. So for the Earthlings, it's pretty hopeless when they're not even seeing how strong Piccolo or even Dende has gotten. But keep that in mind, since if we really do that joke, which I say is fully worth it on just the grounds of it being interesting for Dende to offer the Earthlings potential unleashes of their own, as consolation prizes if you'll call it that. And it's especially worth it since that's an easy way to make a DBZ reference. Just having Krillin be really impressed with Dende being able to do it for him again, even if he thought there wasn't that much more potential to bring out. Going forward, our Krillin, Yamcha, and Tien are going to be a great bit stronger than they are in canon, which could also have fun implications, and is another happy coincidence of Piccolo and the boys' schemes. When the prelims are over, I believe it'd still come down to a similar roster, just with Goten and Kid Trunks knocking out Future Trunks and one of the jobbers from the ranks. It also makes sense for Dende and Popo to make it there, but on account of the pacifism, I could see Popo only fighting so long as Dende is in the competition, and thus forfeiting if any of their friends are unlucky enough to face him. Honestly, the dream way for this to happen would be in the prelims, as a tag match between Dende, Popo, Goten, and Trunks, with that being how the former duo are eliminated, Dende going down, and Popo forfeiting the seat to him. Not long after, Bojack and his gang roll up, and things start to look a lot like in canon, with the sole exception of Gohan teaming up with Goten and Trunks here, and doing a great deal better against the other Heritans with their help, while Vegeta joining them still makes an eventual and significantly more impressive appearance, with he and Gohan both being equally shocked with how much power Piccolo has brought out of the boys. When Bojack finally joins the fray himself and unleashes his full power, Piccolo is ultimately the one who saves the day when he protects the Saiyans, taking his weights off and engaging Bojack on seemingly equal footing, before deciding to respect him by revealing something brand new he learned from teaching the boys. He didn't unlock a new form or technique per se, but remember, he has figured out a way to put himself into a higher gear or level as Trunks would put it, by seeking his mind, spirit, and goals with Nail and Kami, literally one of Piccolo's technically a transformation/boost abilities in the Budokai games. This power allows Piccolo to overcome full power Bojack even easier than Gohan would in the original movie non-canon, since Piccolo would have a multitude of options to complete this task, simply using his various techniques, which have now been further mastered, souped up, and evolved beyond belief, like the explosive Demon Wave, Special Beam Cannon, Hellzone Grenade, or perhaps even some of the new things he's cooked up with Goten and Trunks. The Mafuba would also be a pretty great option, which could open a lot of other options in the process, this offering a possibly easy enough route to victory that Bojack could be spared, or maybe even turn good alongside his crew, as I could easily see Piccolo seeing some of himself as a Demon Clansman, as well as Namekian in the Heritans, and just as Goku would view it, he could also get another great potential training partner out of the Space Pirate. Plus, if Gohan and the boys take out his gang more successfully, more of them could survive as well, and less innocent lives could be taken in the process. Thus, funnily enough, this could be a timeline where Krillin has a legitimate dilemma over whether he wants to pursue a relationship with Android 18 who he met first, or the likes of Zangia, after being given a similar second chance to her. I just gotta mention it somewhere since I've never felt it was that worth a scenario of its own, despite being a funny dynamic, but it usually feels more like the byproduct of other what-ifs in themselves. This one by necessity kinda having to come from a what if the movies were canon themselves, and with the end goal of just setting Krillin up with someone different. That said though, regardless of his choice, he primarily among the humans would be set up to get a lot stronger over the next year, and desire to catch up to Piccolo and the Saiyans, as well as being able to handle his new girlfriend, whomever she may be. We may have to discuss what we keep in discarded in terms of the theory crafting next part as well, but for sure, Bojack Unbound ends in an overwhelming victory, along with some prequel stuff for the setup of the Buu Saga. The stinger at the end being Goku recognizing just how tough Piccolo and the boys have really gotten from Otherworld, as he had nearly decided to go down to Earth himself, which would have broken the rules in the process. This, however, makes him really happy, as well as proud of his second son Goten, and even a bit anxious to return to life, far before any of the excitement he is unaware is already incoming. The first order of business as we resume our tale is fixing the Krillin's relationship status mistake made on my end last part. Thank you for all the corrections. Krillin would definitely be with 18 by this point, so we can go with my idea of giving Zangia the 18 treatment, but with Yamcha instead being the one interested in her, and most likely not having a ton of success courting her immediately. This isn't a major consequence though, because it's not really a story centered around this change to give it the time it deserves. But who knows, she could be a strong fighter for Buu to absorb during the arc later on, or she could simply ride the bench like most of the other characters outside of the filler for example. Thus for what we're worried about, the events of the Buu Saga begin to play out with the fallout of Piccolo, Goten, and Trunks' growth in this timeline, alongside what happened with Bojack last time. This means that Gohan has been given a slight warning that he has begun to lose a lot of the strength he worked so hard to cultivate, and more than likely as a response, will begin light exercise and daily training to avoid this as much as he can, in order to, if nothing else, maintain all the power he gained for the battle itself, and possibly further polish it, or if manageable, just barely get a tad stronger than that, so that he is not left behind. Gohan is also extremely likely to try to engage himself in at least some of the training with Piccolo, Goten, and Trunks, or at the very least, still Goten in his spare time like he did in canon, and possibly as a further push, Piccolo if he can squeeze a bit of extra time outside of his studies, making it wholly possible for him to grow stronger than in canon by this point as well. Vegeta has been given an early and stark example of Trunks' potential, and likely attempts to reignite the difficulty of his own training even further than he would in canon. Also likely attempting to snag Trunks away from his training with Piccolo, or possibly draw the Namekian into it, at the very least witness his training, which also brings up the interesting discussion of the impacts Vegeta joining in on this training could have, as he is more knowledgeable on the development of Saiyan specifically, and in this canon would have a much firmer and faster formed interest in the development of present Trunks, as much like his future counterpart, the boy would have simply earned his father's respect. Involvement for Vegeta and Goten's training as well has always just been an interesting prospect, as has involvement of Gohan in training up Kid Trunks, mostly because these are just ways in which you can make the timelines of Dragon Ball kind of rhyme in a way. And beyond that, with this timeline's versions of Goten and Trunks, there's a lot more to work with, and to benefit from the working with, to really change the timeline even further, as this means just about every one of the main Z fighters who will be relevant in the coming story arcs will receive a major boon, including Goku, who would have spectated at least the big moments of this timeline, like Bojack's invasion, and trained hard in excitement for them. Gohan becomes the Great Saiyan Man and either meets Videl again now, or they reunite, with Videl recognizing him from the tease of her getting an earlier glimpse from just the Cell games, and the longer one from the Bojack incident. So he is invited to the 25th World Martial Arts Tournament, with many fighters deciding to enter as well, and even Goku deciding to use a 24-hour pass with fortune teller Baba to attend. Everyone is excited to see him, recognizing him instantly in contrast to the last Tenkaichi Budokai he attended and competed in, while also showing the differences the passage of time has made. It is Goku who this time doesn't recognize Gohan, on account of how much he has grown as both a young man and a young warrior. And when seeing him next to Goten, whom Goku would have only seen a few times when peering into the world of the living passively, it is almost possible for him to mistake his youngest son as a new version of himself, or maybe even Gohan's child, on account of how strong he can tell they've both become, making him very proud and excited to test their strength. From here, the timeline begins to seem as if it is matching with canon very well, including Goten and Trunks being very dismayed by the prospect of the children's bracket. Though here, with them being closer to Piccolo, I actually think he will be able to both preempt and dissuade them from their Mighty Mask antics, both because it is troublesome, but also because it will make a mockery of the competition, and the many people and fighters who have trained and worked hard in anticipation for the tourney, including himself. Thus, the actual Mighty Mask will remain in the bracket, while Krillin would no-sell Pintar even hard in the first match. Outside of these changes, however, things are very recognizable, until the point Piccolo, or Majin Buu, faces off a Supreme Kai, or Shin. Here, Piccolo is still majorly put off by him, but because of the great deal of strength and confidence he's achieved through the ripples of this timeline, he's less scared to compete, and further dedicates himself to testing out what's up with this Kaiborn himself, allowing a rather large change to happen. As they battle, the two begin to engage in telepathic dialogue, which when things check out is true, Piccolo eventually deems to let the others in on, as he is warned of Babidi's possible attack on the tourney, and why the Supreme Kai is here. As the two strategize together, it is decided that Shin will take a dive, while Piccolo advances to keep up the appearances of the tournament, bringing the Kai up and allowing him to maintain his anonymity as if he weren't here, though in reality, he's warned the Z fighters better than he did in canon. Meanwhile, Videl and Spopovich may be next, but depending on how strong the Videl of this timeline could grow as a result of the changes so far, it is entirely quite possible for her Achilles reading alone to be so enticing that she may be the first person to have her energy drained from Master Babidi, though it is also possible for the fight to go extremely similar as it did in canon, since Spopovich was motivated by his grudge against Mr. Satan as much as Babidi's power. Though again, simply because of her power, it would likely be toned down to Videl either edging out a victory, even if she is pretty beaten up or drained in the process, or simply going down in a somewhat similar fashion to canon. In fact, if this could be done slyly enough, Spopovich could try to be truly vindictive in an attempt to work his way through the entire bracket to Hercule, and he would simply need to attempt to conceal his use of the outside tool to drain Videl's energy by working with Yamu, and then vice versa. That way, they can advance in the tourney and conceal their true goal until it's far too late. Regardless, Gohan, due to his feelings for Videl, would still secure her senzu bean, I think, even if she doesn't need to eat the entire thing. From here on out, these separate ideas in conjunction could change things quite a bit, the most major being that Gohan's greater strength displayed in match number 4 would be an even bigger surprise, and a larger reason to break at least some composure of the tournament, with Yamu likely sacrificing at least his spot for a chance to drain Gohan and retreat. However, like in canon, this is still allowed to happen, as it sends Yamu darting off disqualifying him and advancing Jewel into the next round without a contest. In stark contrast to canon, however, Spopovich would display a minor amount of greater ego, having been swayed by his new ambition to work his way up to revenge against Hercule himself, and thus, he will stay, giving me a blatant excuse to not tear the tournament bracket apart completely. At the same time though, it really doesn't matter as we're shown in canon. I mostly just think it'd be fun to let this Gohan dog walk Spopovich in the 10th match. This is where the next major change would come into play, since with so many of the adult parties still wanting to finish the tournament, and the fact that we thankfully already have multiple heroes on standby already, with the Supreme Kai ready to follow as well as the stronger version of Videl, if nothing else, since the others can join as the tourney winds down. But most importantly, Goten and Trunks will be free and ready to go, since they've done nothing but watch others fight since the end of the children's bracket so far, in which Trunks still kinda dissatisfyingly won by cheating. And beyond that, after assessing the situation himself and asking them to go, it will be clear that Piccolo is trusting them to handle this problem, despite its dire stakes. The way he once talked about trusting in Gohan when he was only a kid, as Vegeta and the Saiyans were invading, or when fending off Cell and the androids. This would therefore inspire the boys to take this seriously and act like adult Z-fighters, and hopefully calm Chi-Chi and Bulma down as much as it reasonably could, before they would too go off towards the more dangerous action, while Kibito too likely forfeits to follow them. And while we're at it, if she had prior warning, Android 18 would likely have formatted her plan to bribe Mr. Satan far earlier, meaning she could also go, if only as a favor to Chi-Chi and Bulma as fellow moms. And if we simply need babysitters, Yamcha and Zangief come up again as names that are great choices. This means we would actually get to jump directly to Goku and Vegeta's match, which I can't imagine the duo having any complaints about, as they had already made all the agreements about the stipulations of the fight, though we'll check back in just a second. As with our other heroes, Shin and Kibito may have more hesitation than in canon with their initial team this time, but I actually think it would probably be less than if Piccolo framed sending the boys out to handle this issue, as the two of them truly being the future strongest under the heavens, and thus the objectively correct choices to handle this evil wizard Babidi and stop him from achieving his goals. Though as there is a wily and dangerous Demon King to deal with still, here I could actually see it being either Videl, Yamcha, or 18, taking one for the team and inadvertently protecting the others, as the one to become encased in the stone spit first, meaning if it is 18, she and Krillin really trade places here. This however sets off the battle between everyone in Babidi's forces, as they pursue them into the ship and the battle is on. As the current lead fighters, the boys Goten and Trunks are on the same page like most times, so they don't mind just sharing opponents and blowing through the likes of Pui and Yakon faster than the adults would have in canon, by wasting time trying to evenly divvy up the bad guys like cookies, even though in the end, they're all small fries, simply as per the changes of this timeline. Meanwhile, Videl and the others would likely enjoy a more fitting and familiar challenge for her, and as strong as she could be here, she would do well taking on any of the lackeys of Pui's race who got in their way until the match of Dabura will begin. As we've already established that Goten and Trunks here would be at least worth a Cell Saga Gohan each, Dabura unfortunately has little chance of winning this fight, unless he just plays it far dirtier and more cunning than he ever has, making him pretty overtly wish he had brought something he calls a third eye, before he begins resorting to exclusively trying to turn the boys to stone. Though this would make his attacks a bit too predictable, and thus, Goten and Trunks could capitalize, pulling off a combo move that makes Dabura bite his own tongue and get his stone spit on himself, in order to be left wide open before he is subsequently locked out and through a couple walls of the ship to the room hiding Babidi in the egg. Meanwhile, back at the tourney, unfortunately for Vegeta, because of both the stipulations of trying to stay away from the Super Saiyan forms, Ki Blast, and even Flight, as well as the fact that Goku is far more familiar with the rule set of the Tenkaichi Budokai, I think even with the changes for Vegeta presented in the timeline, Goku would almost certainly win the match against Vegeta, likely somewhat unfairly, with the ring out possibly, leaving both Saiyans rather unsatisfied with their bout, despite it being a rather spectacular match from them both in Earthling standards. But since they know they can both go even further beyond, they both end up quietly lamenting the fact that they only had these 24 short hours to fight one another again. But even so, because they at least got to get directly to their fight, they are better able to accept that what is simply is here. And so regardless, with this result now freeing Vegeta up to go and join the situation with the boys, he departs as agreed, and in better spirits than his canon counterpart would be. After this, Mighty Mask will take on Killer in a match that's somehow more anticlimactic. So tossing a coin, I have decided to give this to Mighty Mask, advancing him beginning the next round with Piccolo versus Krillin. Unfortunately for him, though I love Krillin and think he would grow incredibly strong in this timeline compared to his canon counterpart, I do think he would be defeated, though he also may be eager to go after 18 of the others. Meanwhile, Gohan would beat the brakes off of Spopovich to avenge Videl, which would likely endear Mr. Satan to him very quickly in this timeline. Then, after Spopovich is carted away, Mr. Satan takes on Goku in a fight that feels a lot more akin to Goku trying to train the champ up, and also likely reminiscing about some of his antics in the Cell Saga, and how big a help he ended up being. So in the end, I think Hercule would cleverly find a way to frame his forfeiting the match as a heartwarming cover story about him just wanting a father and a son to enjoy their special reunion at the tournament, making him root for Goku and Gohan, or the Great Saiyan Man, to make it all the way and for one of them to become the new temporary champion, since hopefully they wouldn't be competing in the 26th tournament. Again advancing Goku unsatisfyingly for him, while Mr. Satan is cheered for almost as hard as when he defeated Cell. And so flipping the coin again, I would once again pick Mighty Mask over Jewel, snapping the fight right back to something genuinely interesting in Piccolo vs. Gohan at the Tenkaichi Budokai, which I feel will be an all-time classic match, likely having a lot of similar tones to their training for the Turn of Power, but more in the lines of Piccolo first testing to see how much power Gohan may have lost out on, and then likely being surprised and put on the back foot, since once he caught up, as long as he kept training, Gohan could easily surpass the new benchmark set by Piccolo and the others, even if he did so more discreetly and in his spare time, or while he studied, as their match turns into an almost direct runback of the original fight between Son Goku and Vegeta at the 23rd Budokai. Though here, with the ring taking nowhere near the damage, and with Gohan showing far more raw power than his father did, as well as the brutal cunning of the Demon Clan style, as he is able to score a 10-second knockdown on Piccolo and advance himself to the finals, making his original master very proud, before he as well leaves to check on the Babidi situation. Next, Goku obviously defeats Mighty Master Joe and Gohan in the finals, and while the only real match he's had so far, the one with Vegeta, may have been a tad disappointing at the end, I think spiritually, this will be the fight that Goku is the most excited for, if not simply on account of how he left things with Gohan during the Cell Saga, the match likely being a great deal of fun for them both, but also some much needed bonding after 7 years of separation, as this bout would also act as a fulfilling catharsis to the events that resulted in Goku's death, and which made Gohan feel very guilty, and may have even added to trauma that further deterred him from training. As for who the winner is, once again, under the conditions of tournament rules and no transformations and such, I could see it as a toss-up, since Goku is Goku, but Gohan's potential in this story specifically is a bit easier to tap into and capitalize on. So I would like to say that Gohan would probably come out on top, even if we need to pull off a somewhat 20-second tourney style conclusion for that to be the case. Or maybe a conclusion along the lines of the other world tournament, where Goku is the loser because in the heat of the enjoyment of the battle, his heel or something is made to clearly skim the grass of the audience barrier, while Gohan in contrast very astutely tries to keep this in mind, despite also having fun reuniting and fighting with his dad. The fight would be so incredible in fact that the announcer would have trouble finding a spot to cut in and mention the DQ. In the end either way, Goku and Gohan would come out of the fight proud and satisfied, as the tournament would just be for fun. So with it not being consequential, what exactly happened with Buu? Well, unfortunately, Babidi isn't a complete fool, and would have recognized that Spopovich never returned, likely seeing him hone in on the later fights of the tournament as other great sources of killing and bloodshed, meaning with the energy siphoned from Gohan and Videl, as well as any Babidi may have devised a way to take when, say, Gohan was beating up Spopovich, that's all free for the taking. And thus, Buu was indeed freed. However, the result was unexpected. Instead of a depraved monster, a large pink jolly creature is released, and for the most part, he is honestly quite reasonable, despite the Supreme Kai throwing a fit. The first to point this out of course being Trunks, in a rather disrespectful manner, but this interaction would possibly lead to Buu befriending the Z-Fighters, like Goten, Trunks, and Videl, before he gets a chance to meet B and Mr. Satan, with this going exceedingly well, on account of how Piccolo's updated training/babysitting style has taught Goten and Trunks how to mix the use of their fighting power and imaginations to play different kinds of games. However, this all takes a turn when Dabura reawakens and gets an order from Babidi to target Buu and the Earthlings, so that he will learn his place and obey them. In the process, Babidi makes his final mistake far sooner than in canon, since thankfully, while Goten, Trunks, Kibito, and Supreme Kai are strong enough to withstand this, Videl, 18, Yamcha, and Zangief are critically injured, enraging Buu and unlocking something dark within him, as a second far more evil version of the creature emerges and feasts upon the originator, before subsequently destroying Babidi and Dabura with nothing but a minor hand gesture and a guilty flash. Then when the dark deed is done, the creature begins to transform again into something far more horrible and closer to the danger that Supreme Kai was trying to describe and avoid. Despite the power of the other Z-Fighters who are arriving one by one, this new Super Buu is stronger than anything they have faced so far, and even displays the ability to absorb the powers of others, not unlike cells, but vastly enhanced, as Android 18 and Krillin end up lending to the evil gent's power and ego, as now all of a sudden after absorbing the married couple, it is cooler, more cunning, and seemingly in love with itself, with things beginning to look dire until the likes of Vegeta and Piccolo arrive. For a while, these two appear as if they will be able to turn the tides, since Vegeta has a lot of pent-up aggression from the tournament to let out, and Piccolo, as an immensely strong fuse being in his own right, somewhat knows how to identify when Super Buu means to call on the power and techniques of those he absorbed, and beyond this, the duo have learned to work together somewhat. But this is all for naught when Vegeta pushes the likes of Goten and Trunks out of the way to avoid them being absorbed, giving Super Buu Vegeta the edge to begin overpowering and absorbing Piccolo, who for a moment seems as if he is beginning to regret his decision to endure the tournament and leave things to the next generation. But instead, trusting in the students he decided to train earlier in this timeline, Piccolo encourages that he's sure Goten and Trunks will end this, as he's absorbed as well, and Buu becomes truly unstoppable seemingly. His power now noticeable enough that even if the tournament hadn't come to an end, the other fighters likely would have come. But before they can enter the fray, Supreme Kai attempts to dissuade them from engaging and giving the enemy any more power, while Goku explains having a plan and simply needing to buy time to enact it, getting Gohan to try and hold off Buu while he shows the boys how to do a special technique he learned in the other world. That said, however, with the changes presented in their discipline and control thanks to Piccolo, it would probably be overall too easy for Gohan and Trunks to master the Metamora fusion dance, about as easy as slipping on earrings for example. So changing the timeline immensely here if only for the sake of it, let's find a way to logically go that route. since I do believe Kibito and Shin weren't actually aware of how Potara worked until meeting the Yokai. What if instead this fusion was totally by accident, or maybe as a result of something very good deep inside Buu, say because of the bonding between the supposed heinous Buu and the young Z warriors, since Kibito and Shin were there after all, and Buu could easily recognize the trinkets hanging from their ears and become curious, as he might bluntly ask the Kais what their funny jewelry is about, since he likes it, to which they would stiffly, and rather ignorantly, reply that they are mere symbols of great significance to the Kais. In a slight mockery of this, I could then see Buu spit out the Potara that once belonged to the Grand Supreme Kai, as he technically still has them on him, gifting them to Goten and Trunks, so they can match their friends, since they are after all much stronger and more fun to play with than the others, or something else seemingly childish and innocent like that. By nature, Goten, like his father, would find this a bit cooler and funnier than Trunks, who may think the earrings lame, but I don't actually think he'd throw his away, simply and coolly stowing in his pocket as a trinket to add to his master toy collection later, which may sadden Buu initially. But then, when the fight with Super Buu happens, and really becomes dire, the boys could attempt to reach their new friend by reminding him of the fun they had, and his gift to them, prompting Trunks to put his Potara on and show it off, so he can prove to Buu that he does care, and value his friendship and his gift, unknowingly in the process, activating the magic earrings, as suddenly, Goten and Trunks fly and smash into each other, in a swirling burst of light and energy, while every remaining and arriving Z-fighter from the end of the tournament wonders what this new power could be, and if it will somehow save them, as a never-before-seen warrior takes to the battlefield, and begins questioning what he should call himself. Bursting onto the scene, the newly revealed Potara fusion of Goten and Trunks fuses what it should be called, and showing a minor dominance of Goten's personality in the fused being, rather quickly, optimistically and maturely, decides to just call the fusion Trunten, expecting someone else would really appreciate the cooler sounding alternative, off-put by this naively affectionate and loyal fused fighter who refuses to give off any power before he demonstrates the proper manners and introduces himself with a bow. Super Buu strides forwards to clobber and then gobble this soft anime-haired pipsqueak up for wasting his time after that flashy light show. But the moment he steps forward instead of bowing himself, the fused Saiyan boy has already crossed the distance between them and begins to unleash a high-speed rush. Luckily, Buu draws on the knowledge of Piccolo and Vegeta inside him to recognize his favorite move of Trunks, allowing the extreme power absorption user to only take a couple of the attacks before dodging the big finisher, which manifests as a flurry of super velocity punches and kicks. However, no amount of knowledge can make up for lacking the wild instinct of both the Namekian and the Saiyan themselves, and thus, Buu is caught off guard by Goten's favorite charge technique, seeing the big bad boss still hit, as Trunten rebalances himself by aiming a ki blast at the ground in order to launch an even faster and heavier hitting headbutt, which lands a heavy slam into Buu's center mass, and even forces his body to elongate. Desperately, Buu tries to counter this by shifting his form to absorb Trunten, but instead of allowing this, the Potara warrior instead activates his Super Saiyan form, suddenly blasting himself out of the impromptu made mob Buu with a streak of light, and landing a massive chunk of damage on him as they're separated. Feeling quite outpaced already, Buu sets his sights on covertly trying to absorb Goku and Gohan to punch over the power level of Trunten, sneakily snaking a chunk of him blown off by the fight towards the two spectating Saiyans, though this requires concentration to manipulate it subtly, with this allowing Trunten to unleash even more quickly crafted, but always politely announced synthesis moves from this world's stronger Goten and Trunks. And while this does allow the fusion to invent some impressive moves and land some good early hits, the savvy part of the Potara warrior that is born of Trunks gets suspicious and hatches his own scheme. Meanwhile, this stronger version of Buu succeeds in absorbing Gohan and Goku, who would, to be fair, most likely be very tired out from going through the entire tournament, and the short fight they had with Buu upon arrival, which required them to tap into the power of Super Saiyan 2 and the newly revealed Super Saiyan 3 respectively. Consequently, this seems to add so much strength to Buu that it will be impossible for Trunten to stop him now, with the dastardly Jin deciding to demonstrate this by activating a move to wipe out all life on the planet, or maybe just the planet itself, simply as a flex. However, suddenly, and rather childishly yelling out "Nuh-uh," Trunten, like Goten, tries to copy what he saw Goku do earlier, somehow pushing himself into the Super Saiyan 3 form to launch another attack that cancels out the genocidal planet burst of Super Buu Kuhan Jita Kololin 18 Chaya, and even seems to do another great deal of damage to him, despite powering up. Though unfamiliar with the high energy drain of this form above Super Saiyan 2, Trunten is instantly robbed of all his remaining strength, reverting back down to base form, as his power begins to fall at an exponential rate, making the fused boy whine petulantly about it not being fair that Buu cheated, while the villain slowly heals and laughs from just surviving the nearly fatal blow, and begins to send out another piece of himself to absorb Trunten. Though in doing so, he completely misses that as the Goten dominant Potara fusion hangs his head in shame and defeat, he is actually hiding a quite mischievous smirk, which would best be recognized as the one Goten would sport when convinced into mayhem with Trunks. As they are encircled again, Trunten, instead of copying this time, uses his imagination, or rather his head and key sense, doing something which in this story has so far been theoretical, but is technically presented as happening in canon. And just now with Super Saiyan 3 for Trunten, being accessed for a fusion of forms that the fusees may not actually have at that time, thus pulling on the unlocked potential of Goten and Trunks instead of his own raw power. Trunten rather easily creates and accesses an auxiliary power source that isn't exactly Saiyan in nature, and thus doesn't require all the fancy screaming or lights, or even the slight little minor back tingle of Super Saiyan. Instead, through the mystic understanding of one's own potential and limits in order to break them and awaken true inner power. As Piccolo has taught the boys from the beginning of this story, ultimate Trunten is born, erupting with sharper features and a bright white key, now possessing more than enough power to make a dense energy barrier that protects him, as Buu hastily pulls the young fused being into his innards, but is unable to actually absorb his power. This quickly causes Buu to panic, as his body has suddenly been invaded by Trunten, who seems just as strong as ever, or maybe stronger, as he adapts more and more to his own potential with each passing moment, forcing Buu to do everything he can to chase, destroy, or finish off the fusion, but it's to no avail, as the hero and villain duo virtually put on a cartoon act inside the wacky anti-sense making space that is Buu. This ultimately culminates in Trunten finding the space Buu has stored all his absorption victims, including the good fat Buu, and so uses their ultimate key to create a spirit soccer ball, which he launches and curves hard enough to free them all, just as the Potara fusion wears off. As a result, the boys are forced to make a run for it while struggling to carry all their friends with them, just barely making their way out of Buu, as the Jin transforms for a final time into a more pure and insane form. Seeing this and knowing the fierce battle hasn't ended just yet, Goten and Trunks return to their Super Saiyan 2 forms as the last of their power to try to hold them off, though instead of this still resulting in the destruction of the planet in this timeline, Kid Buu is instead confronted by each fighter he has absorbed, all mystically rejuvenated, and able to get themselves back up and into the fight for one final ultimate attack, thanks to the true final gambit of Trunten being to spend his power, sharing it amongst the Z fighters, allowing Gohan, Piccolo, Goku and Vegeta, alongside 18, Krillin, Zangief, Yamcha, and hell, likely Tien and Chiaotzu too, to stand alongside Goten and Trunks, suddenly showing his own advancement through the time skip and not wasting the power bestowed by Trunten. Vegeta displays the true strength he wanted to show Kakarot in an all-out fight, assuming a Super Saiyan 3 form himself, and leading the Ki Blast clash against Buu's Planet Burst, so that everyone else can join attacks and buy Goku time to charge up a Spirit Bomb. And with an easier time than in canon, Goku is indeed bought the time he needs to launch the Spirit Bomb, and using the energy he got from Trunten and the support of the other Z fighters, they're even able to outpower and destroy Kid Buu successfully without the need of the Dragon Balls. Following this, a bit of time passes, as the vast majority of how the end of the Buu Saga went in canon becomes mirrored once again, only with some small changes, like the Kais thanking Goten and Trunks for their help as the linchpin saviors during this crisis, and furthermore ask if there is anything they can do for the young heroes, to which they ask for the good Buu to be forgiven of his crimes, and for Goku to be revived. Aside from this, Buu would also likely still become quite close to Mr. Satan, Videl, and even Gohan, likely still living with Mr. Satan and getting close with him, just not as close as he does with the boys, as they're best buds now. Daima would or could take place next, though in my mind, it wouldn't be very relevant for Goten or Trunks as babies. Piccolo, though, would for sure get a much bigger role. In fact, I could see him snagging an entire Tamagami fight just to himself, or maybe getting his own demonic power from Neva. Perhaps something like a devilish looking form matching the demon realm Porunga, something which resembles Orange Piccolo, and is very easily renamed to Red Piccolo. Of course, outside of the events of Daima, he'd never used it again, unless we take a left turn while traveling down the timeline to explore the GT branch, which would probably wind up being Kid Goku, Pan, Trunks, and Goten going on the Grand Tour, and having many of the same adventures, including Piccolo's sacrifice and becoming an unofficial guardian and warden of hell. A rather fitting position for this version of the character, mind you. Therefore, Yo's son Goku and his friends' return would take place next, and actually, even if it seems like it wouldn't change all too much except for the characters being stronger, we can see some pretty worthwhile differences, like the fact that Goten and Trunks wouldn't form Trunten in the special, since while they would still have the gift of Potara Buu gave them, and in fact would never have even heard the Fuse Forever misinfo from Old Kai, who was still in the Z-Sword, the boys wouldn't think to bring the earrings this time, which would actually bum out Goten and Trunks, as while they suspect they can easily take avocado without fusion, and one of the adults could definitely do so even easier than that, is far less flashy and fun without fusion. Luckily, Goku knows another method, and gets his chance to finally show off the fusion dance, first attempting to help Vegeta to help him demonstrate, but instead ending up doing so with Piccolo, who is much more amiable to embarrassment when it comes to helping the youth. Thus, after a shorter bit of instruction than needed in canon for a more disciplined Goten and Trunks, Gotenks Gotenks is finally born into this timeline, though he is seemingly upset that he is technically the younger of a set of fusion brothers as he puts it, which still bothers him even though he got the cooler name. Regardless, as Gotenks is in canon, with his personality more reminiscent of Trunks, Avocado becomes a glorified training dummy for the Moro and Fusion Warrior to try out all the moves he would have done had he been formed first to beat Super Buu, and even some of the ones he's thought of since then. As a result, initially appearing as if he's operating with far more raw and reckless power than even Trunten had, as Gotenks also rather brightly shows off that he too is capable of using Super Saiyan and Super Saiyan 3, though this eats through a good bit of his energy. But it really wouldn't matter, as Turbo's problem would be long over or gone by now, freeing Gotenks up to do all the flashy moves he wants, and just generally show off, since he still has a bit of time on the fusion clock. However, when Gotenks attempts to do what Trunten can do, and prove himself the better fusion, he discovers that he's unable to turn himself into Ultimate Gotenks, as when he attempts to do so, he can't seem to regulate his flow of ki in the right way, resulting in him first transforming into a bloated, fat, and out-of-shape form, and then when trying to suck it in and control himself, he becomes far too skinny and malnourished, with it being here that the fusion suddenly times out, while Gotenks whines and curses in a way that gets Goten and Trunks in trouble about not being able to go Ultimate. Being admittedly curious about this, as no one else got to see Ultimate, the Z-Warrior partygoers encouraged Goku to instant transmission the boys to Mount Paozu in Capsule Corp in order to find the Potara, so that when they return to the party, they can form a Trunten in order to demonstrate this newly discovered form, even though there is no longer a danger. But instead of allowing this for free, the Potara fusion once formed demands that something new be brought to show and tell on their end as well, suggesting they have a spar, since Avocado was too weak to be a challenge, and Trunten for one wants to know more about which type of fusion is really better, though obviously it was Potara. Actually curious and excited by this prospect himself, Goku is obviously game for this, but surprisingly, so is Gohan, as it is a chance to learn something new, with everyone speculating how strong a fusion with the bond of parent and child may be, compared to one form of the bond of best friends, even if their name technically doesn't have to change. However, before Gohan can begin attempting the dance, a red-faced Vegeta steps in, demanding that if anyone is going to merge with Kakarot to test the bounds of these silly fusions, then it should be the Prince of all Saiyans. Not minding sitting out at all so he can observe the fighting, Gohan is fine with this, and so after one or two failed fusions and an hour-long wait, Gogeta as well is born on this day, proudly and excitedly accepting Trunten's challenge, as the younger Potara fusion excitedly responds to the call of Yosha and assumes the ultimate form. Unfortunately, while Trunten is incredibly powerful and the more experienced fusion, there is still something to be said about the power of Metamoran fusion when used by more mature and focused warriors. Or perhaps, it is instead the boost of the two fusees being rivals rather than friends. Or maybe, it's just the fact that Gogeta has a far bigger and stronger body, as he demonstrates a great deal more oomph and mastery over the use of the base form, and even more so power with just his Super Saiyan form. Ultimately, assuming a Super Saiyan 3 form so strong the Metamoran Saiyan warrior is simply able to pin and force Trunten to submit by exuding an aura of ki so dense it threatens to crush the Potara user as it pushes against his own. Therefore, the battle is called in Gogeta's, and thus Metamoran fusion's favor. While just before the two sides unfuse, they each warn that next time, before they settle the score, the other guys will have to have a go at it. From here, we could also adapt Fusion Reborn as we did with Bojack Unbound, just for the sake of it. But to be fair, it would probably be very boring. The big change is probably just being that Vegeta fights and defeats Jinbei instead of Gogeta, making his first appearance of this verse. Though to be fair, this would mean another Dragon Ball sword fight, which the few we've gotten in official media have been pretty good. And while on the topic of Z movies, even if ham-fisted, I would probably rule that the Tapion of this universe winds up staying with Trunks and his family after the film, being adopted as Trunks' alien big brother instead of his time-traveling counterpart / big brother, who the alien reminds everyone of, which is also sweet, since this version of Trunks could be a bit more like Minosha. Thus, as we move into Battle of Gods, and the new highest level of strength the Z fighters have experienced, by the time Beerus has arrived, everyone's power will be much higher, as they're now chasing fused beings, even if it will be meaningless against Beerus, as he'd act as an immovable benchmark for the story. For example, Vegeta would still surpass Goku's Super Saiyan 3 power in this timeline with his rage boost, but it would still just even things back out to how they went in canon for a while, likely culminating in Goku handling things with his new god forms. And not only that, but as we enter into this era, even being stronger and having more forms and mastery of fusion than in canon, Goten and Trunks just wouldn't have many opportunities to be relevant alongside Piccolo, sometimes because they wouldn't be interested or given the chance to fight. Admittedly, they would do much better and more impressively during the Battle of Gods and Resurrection F arcs alongside Gohan for sure, but this is a small victory on its own, as from here, I really don't see them having much interaction or play during the Goku Black arc, unless forced to do so, but I do at least think that Kid Trunks in this timeline would wholeheartedly join in on the training of his future self in order to help him save his time, especially since this version of Kid Trunks has used the Pendulum Room to view and train with some of the experiences of future Trunks. And if he helps out with Goten and possibly even the use of their fusions, the gains of the future Trunks of this timeline would be way better than they would in canon, by only getting a bit of experience fighting Super Saiyan 3 in blue. Also, if Tapion is here, then he could join in as well. And aside from this, Piccolo will be recruited to the team to reform the Mafuba instead of Goku trained to learn it, if only to keep him involved. But also, because his past win against Bojack more heavily hammers home that he does know how to handle these things. After the Black Arc, the tournament of power would roll around, and for the most part, our biggest changes are just that we can have a way stronger and more diverse team in Universe 7, on account of all the upskilling that's going on in that universe for all this time. Krillin, Tien, and Roshi could even give up their spots to Zyongia, Tapion, and maybe even if they wanted to be cheeky, Goten, Trunks, or one of their fusions, since the warrior would only need to exist for a measly 48 minutes anyway. And I do think regardless of what happens before the tourney, Dende would probably unlock the potential of every Team Universe 7 member aside Frieza, as he can do this here, and it takes less time than the old Kai's version. As a consequence, this could arguably result in an Ultimate Gohan as well, considering that the difference in old Kai and Guru's potential unlock on Gohan may just be the amount of potential he had untapped when he was a 5-year-old versus when he was a grown man. This could also therefore mean crazy stuff like all of Team 7 having the ability to achieve a power awakened / ultimate form, at least if they really spent the time to push and understand how it works, or possibly were stressed to break their limits hard enough by the oncoming battles, which happens for just about everyone during the Tournament of Power, mind you, meaning that by this point, Piccolo could pick up his earlier teased transformation at long last, possibly alongside an Ultimate 18 and 17, Ultimate Tapion, and Ultimate Zyongia on the team as well. In the end, I don't see this arc presenting a lot of challenge or intriguing changes that wouldn't be very forced or just cosmetic though, as we've discussed. The same probably going for Super Broly, as Goten, Trunks, and Piccolo are pretty much just cameos there. However, training after these events, and right before the events of the Moro Arc begins, I could see the now truly powered up trio of Piccolo, Goten, and Trunks getting back into the groove as best they can with their training, since Pan would also be beginning to train with Piccolo and Videl in martial arts, bringing us into a rather interesting situation as the second core of Dragon Ball Super kicks off. Our story resumes right in what will be the twilight of events, right after, or during this world's Super Broly, and just before the events of the Moro Arc begin to transpire. From here, Goten, Trunks, Piccolo, and more than likely, from at least time to time, Pan train like they had before, since the boys growing up and balancing other things on top of their development as fighters, much like Gohan once had to do, means they are beginning to face the challenge of mastering balance and priorities, as well as the need to grow to a level to compete and deal with threats operating at a godly level, as they do seem to keep cropping up now more than ever before. This, however, means that the Pan of this timeline would be getting a lot more training and time to play with her Uncle Goten and Trunks, accelerating her growth since she's not just training with Piccolo, and the Piccolo she is training with is a stronger version. That said, it also means Piccolo has to be a bit more stern than usual, since he needs to watch for correcting any mistakes or bad habits the boy's lapses in focus may be exaggerating, as passing those down to Pan will be extremely counterproductive. Thankfully, as a blessing in disguise, or maybe as divine punishment, the Namekian actually wasn't quite sure yet, but the dual synchronicity is the one thing that has consistently grown far stronger at a rate that reminds him of a Saiyan power level, with their insane Zenkai boosts and the like, as they've continued to share many of their experiences and feelings with one another, despite continuing to grow as very different people, all while from a young age taking on battles that threaten to destroy their world and universe, and now the trials of growing up like Earthlings, with all the complications and oddities that entails. And through it all, Trunks and Goten's bond has only gotten stronger. Thus, even without training it to, their fused power still continues to grow remarkably, in a way that reminds Piccolo much more of the Namekians, or even the Majin, rather than Saiyans here to be quite frank. This discovery is exemplified when on a day when Goten, Trunks, and Piccolo had specifically decided they would not only leave Pan behind to train with Videl and her dojo students after school, instead of with them so they can go all out, as well as the boys promising they would both leave their Potara at home, and refrain from performing the fusion dance during their training, as it was becoming a bit of a crutch or an instant failsafe for the duo rather than an ultimate or emergency technique. The two best friends still found a way to merge themselves somehow. At first, after they warmed up, things appeared to be going well, with signs of improvement already visible. Then when things got serious, well, put bluntly, Piccolo is a Namekian, and a warrior who's fought in many battles he only survived thanks to being able to count on strong allies, would originally think there was no such thing as being too synchronized. But this concept is demonstrated as very much possible when they try to spar, and Goten and Trunks are unable to actually hit each other. Instead, now beginning to fuse just when they make contact with one another. And most strange of all, it's not truly a fusion. It's more like being smushed or mashed together in a way, into the form of a being who is very obviously neither Gotenks nor Trunten, or even a failed version of either fusion, just a sort of amalgam that is noticeably weaker than the sum of its parts. Thus, it didn't really deserve to be qualified or counted as a fusion. In fact, this wasn't even the kind of beautiful synchronicity the boys were trained to have. It's more like an abomination of it, where they are kind of becoming codependent as fighters, which was never the goal. So even if this mistaken combining technique, which apparently bottlenecks the amount of energy the new being may possess, was actually worth a damn, it would still teach the wrong lesson to actually try to use it. Even though by first glance, it is better than Potara and Metamoran fusion dancing, as this state was attained without dancing or the use of the earrings, all because their ki have just become that precisely synced and fine-tuned to one another, the weakness likely lying in there being nothing to regulate or control all that power that's being wasted. And worse, just as soon as it is made, this amalgamated state ends and leaves the two fusees tired and easier to counter and defeat, on account of not accessing any kind of power out, and instead just kind of stalling out. Confused by this, the trio decide to call things for that day of training and attempt to get back to it later. However, this continues occurring for multiple days of training afterwards, without fail, anytime Trunks and Goten come into contact with one another, even becoming more intense, as the boys eventually begin to merge not by trading blows, but by trading or clashing ki blasts with one another. Fed up with this, as it's leading to other bad habits like Trunks is overcommitting, and Goten being too relaxed and quick to let his guard down worse, as they aren't making nearly as much progress as Piccolo has become used to with the boys, and his various failed attempts to get to the bottom of this strange crisis have borne no fruit, despite this being quite serious, as it essentially means Goten and Trunks just can't fight in the same vicinity as one another. Getting a bit desperate, Piccolo reasons one of their most logical approaches may be attempting to go back to the drawing board when it comes to the concept of them fusing altogether, rather than looking at it as something to be avoided. This eventually culminates in the decision to try training in the Pendulum Room again, to possibly investigate if this could somehow have something to do with fusion itself, and thus, they decide to relive the first time they chose to undergo the phenomena, where a strange occurrence happens. Initially, this all goes as expected, with the trio just witnessing the events of the Buu Saga again, from a more passive and third-person perspective, and maybe a few chances to fight against the illusions of their adversaries from the time. But eventually, Goten and Trunks accidentally form into that strange combined state again. At the same time, they are revisiting the battle with Super Buu and Trunten. Then, something that never happened in the original timeline, or it's supposed the past, occurs. And right before their eyes too, shockingly, showing himself instantly aware of what's happened, and that they are there watching him as a magically conjured entity. The Trunten of the Pendulum Room illusion suddenly shows off enough power to effortlessly change his own fake timeline, one-shotting Super Buu with a dodgeball of ki, and turning its sights on Goten and Trunks, as he has always wanted to inhabit the same space as his components, and better yet, to fight them. This very obviously catches the Z fighters off guard, and then does not go well for Goten, Trunks, or Piccolo when Trunten goes after it, since this strange illusion of the Potara fusion seems to have all the power the current version is capable of. And despite the Gotenks-led fusion usually being polite and calm-natured, he seems particularly more rough and ruthless right now. Or maybe that's just how Super Buu felt on the receiving end of this power. Regardless, it becomes clear, as this is no longer a memory, it's more like a confrontation of the true potential of Trunten, or fusion itself. And he was born for much bigger things than just handling Super Buu, or being treated like a common Super Kamehameha. A fierce resolve burning in his aura to prove that fusion is no mere technique, it is an experience unto its own, and that experience must be respected, accepted, and cherished for one to receive its full power. These words do, however, serve as a good excuse for Goten and Trunks to commit a proper fusion dance in order to put the rogue Potara warrior in his place, as Gotenks, the hero of justice, is formed. Now somehow miraculously facing off, despite how impossible it should be, Piccolo begins to stare on unbelievably and rub his temples even harder, as Gotenks and Trunten begin doing what appears to be playing and competing, rather than outright trying to fight, genuinely bending the laws of reality either way though, as Piccolo is still too frozen in his tracks trying to process how this is even possible, and just as he comes up with a theory, the two fusions affect reality so hard that with a stray blow, Goten and Trunks are knocked out of Gotenks, while instead of disappearing, the Metamoran fusion maintains itself, and at the same time, Trunten ceases fighting with Gotenks, and tries to get him on his side actually, revealing that as this is technically his memory too they're training in, he has a good bit of power here, and he won't cease to exist either. And with the bonds of reality being stressed in multiple different directions, a rare once-in-a-lifetime chance now presents itself, as if they can defeat Goten and Trunks, and then escape the Pendulum Room, they can probably change reality forever, and in the process, swap themselves to Trunks and Goten, making them the fusions, while the two of them get to enjoy everyday life in real training, claiming quite truthfully that with greater potential and focus, they could leave Goten and Trunks to rest as the children they are. While replacing them, Trunten and Gotenks can ascend to the level of gods and gain the power to do whatever they want, whenever they want. With this argument rather quickly winning over Gotenks, who all too happily considers the idea of becoming a permanently existing being, and really ends up liking it. So showing their resolve to pull this off, Trunten and Gotenks also display power over imagination in this space, attaining and utilizing forms and transformations none of them have trained for or shown any aptitude to, or sometimes the forms that nobody has even seen or thought possible, but seemingly showing that the potential for them are at least theoretically real, as we would see glimpses of things like godly forms, and even a bit of the power that Goku is said to display during the Tournament of Power, or maybe even a power that reminds everyone a great deal of Lord Beerus's. Goten, Trunks, and Piccolo fight against the fused warriors as best they can, but the gap in strength remains far too vast. The dynamic and impossible tag team of Gotenks and Trunten presenting the toughest challenge these versions of the characters have faced to date, and in the process, forcing them to adapt and keep up with Piccolo trying to fight alongside the boys, and syncing with them with all he has as well. Eventually though, as the inevitable conclusion that this is a losing battle comes, Piccolo does his best to protect his students, claiming the fusions will have to destroy him first before he allows them to hurt Goten and Trunks, and if there's any parts of them left inside them, they will realize and appreciate that. But as this serious declaration of affection in the bond of master and student is expressed, Trunten and Gotenks begin to break out into hysterical laughter, unable to keep up the air of menace and resolve they were putting on, and thus giving their game away. Slowly realizing this was only a prank, and an excuse for a good spar and some yucks, somehow orchestrated by the fusions themselves, Piccolo and the boys are reminded the illusions of the Pendulum Room, by definition, can't be real, even if they can be extremely vivid, or mildly manipulated. That said, this experience, and the feelings of Trunten and Gotenks, were very real. They should all respect fusion a lot more, and from more than just one perspective, or else they're gonna squander its power, all of them. Then with one final snark that though Piccolo isn't technically either of their masters by definition, Trunten and Gotenks will both admit it may have been some of his coolness that helped them to refine their own awesomeness. And then with that, the two fusions bid their prank victims farewell and disappear before the environment around them returns to that of the Pendulum Room. And with it, the shocking discovery that Goten and Trunks' fused forms have seemed to gain some kind of higher dimensional consciousness, which exists even when they aren't actually formed. And that admittedly is also quite intriguing and unbelievable, in an endless existential question prompting kind of way for the entire trio. Though once again, Piccolo muses if this seeming impossibility could have something to do with how closely the boys have studied and trained under him as an Namekian, since he kinda remembers a familiar feeling during the Tournament of Power. It was only a hypothesis, but maybe through subconsciously witnessing Piccolo syncing with the absorbed and fused essences of Nail and Kami within him over the years, or maybe even their understanding of King Piccolo's birth and reincarnation of Piccolo, Goten and Trunks did what Saiyans do so well and adapted somehow, learning to kind of do so themselves, but to the beings that they had created, being Trunten and Gotenks, and thus making what those fusion illusions said possible. Nah, of course not, right? Regardless, real risk of being replaced by Trunten and Gotenks or not, the results of this training for Piccolo, Goten, Trunks, and even Pan would be very much real and tangible, and pretty profound, more than able to make up for just about any major missed battle experience during the Super era, which they would have received from not being the most powerful or main fighter in some of the past few crises, due to lacking God Ki, or an easier way to catch up to those who do, with this major progression for Piccolo, Goten, and Trunks being shown off mostly during the Moro Arc, where at least 2 out of the 3 would prepare along with the rest of the Z fighters, meaning stronger gains for everyone around, and maybe even hyperbolic time chambers, and could also mean accelerating Goten and Trunks through their growth spurts if they hadn't already had them yet. This means Piccolo for sure is far stronger than he was before, which is really saying something in this universe, as are Goten and Trunks, who would now be involved in the direct frontline battle against Moro and the escaped Galactic Patrol prisoners. That is, if the saga was even able to progress to that stage, as these power-ups do mean the overall saga would be easier to deal with, but it also means giving Moro more energy and power to absorb and be amped by, though in a more interesting way it could be ended than just retreading Goku and Vegeta solving the issue with Ultra Instincts or Spirit Fission. The Moro arc of this timeline, especially after Trunten and Gotenks' prank, would also be a great place to put where Piccolo's orange form is actually discovered, or at the very least set up before Superhero, maybe coming about by Piccolo being present for the events of the battle with Moro and Namek, and thus made to be the best candidate for the base of the Namekians to fuse into, giving Piccolo another solid power-up, and the Namekians as a whole a better fighting chance. thus allowing us to see stuff like the history and connection of the orange form to Namek and his culture and meaning, like the Ajase trees running rather deep and being explored thoroughly. Piccolo could also still lose the initial fight on Namek alongside Goku and Vegeta, even after fusing with others and just assuming the power awakened form, at least if we still wanted to progress the battle to Earth, mind you, allowing Piccolo to stay on Namek to try to repair the damage and connect to his homeland truly as his own training, while for really the first time, allowing Goten and Trunks to prepare for a crisis as adults alongside the other Z-Wars, allowing all these things to culminate. Then, the combined effort theme of the Moro Arc that is mirrored from the Cell and Android saga can still kinda shine through here, with Majin Buu, Goku, Vegeta, Gohan, Piccolo, Goten, and Trunks leading the charge and getting rid of Moro forever. Afterwards, the Granola the Survivor arc is too far away from home for there to really be too many changes other than it just being a lot crazier, since the entire universe will be a good bit stronger and further along by now. There is also the fact that if Goten and Trunks were trusted enough in this verse to participate in the Tournament of Power, then there would be no reason to revive Frieza, so the arc actually could not even take place. But if it did, the conclusion of the saga and the final clash with Gas would probably play out fully, with Granola, Vegeta, and Goku teaming up and just barely scraping by, or maybe even whipping out Gogeta again, or maybe a Saiyan X Cerulean fusion. By the way, if that's a concept that interests you, be sure to check out What If Bardock's family survived after this, since that story has a lot more time and budget to explore it, hence the shameless plug. Moving on though, as we simply just don't have that much more Dragon Ball at the time for recording to explore this story, and we did start pretty late in the timeline being post-Cell Saga, Superhero is our next and honestly last point of major intrigue, mostly because things would change a great deal simply because of this version of Gamma 1 and 2, and the fact that they would be stronger and more advanced models if they were based off of this Goten and Trunks, and their antics and battles as Saiyaman X1 and X2 against Dr. Hedo and his schemes, and especially due to the revelation of Gotenks and Trunten having obtained greater awareness when unfused in this timeline. Thus, the boys would be a bit more thoughtful, enough to include their fusions in the fun, designing super henshin battleizer modes for their costumes, which would then morph them into Saiyaman X3 and X4, though the fusions would have to discuss and argue about which was which. This does also mean Hedo could have reason to either create 4 superhero androids, or install something in the Gamma 1 and 2 that would grant them transformations into stronger forms, or copy data from Goten and Trunks to steal their fusion concept even. While in contrast, this Piccolo is also a lot stronger, and keeps getting stronger than his canon counterpart for multiple factors by this point, and in fact, would probably be a match for the canon Gammas, and even the ones from this timeline, likely just using his power awakened form, since he'd have had it for so much longer, and have mastered it long ago, and especially considering that he could have still granted this an emergency, and made his wish to Shinron to receive a little extra, allowing him to attain it even stronger than canon Orange form, and or just abuse the fact that attaining Orange during the Moro Arc means that Piccolo can get an early start on experimenting and training in Orange, to see if it can be mastered, or pushed higher possibly. Now whether this version of Cell Max would actually be stronger to keep up with all this though, is a slightly different question, since Dr. Hedo was pretty heavily reluctant in general about making Max, so I could see him not improving it any further than necessary, or to a significantly stronger degree, not the way he wanted his heroes made as cool and strong as possible to match the X-Series Saiyaman. It's also 100% possible due to all this both Gamma survived in this timeline, going on to join the ranks of the former adversaries turned allies amongst the Z-Fighters, because on top of the entire roster being stronger unlike in canon, the heroes are also benefiting from the help and scaling of a stronger and more reliable Goten and Trunks, who by now would have fully adapted to their growth spurts. The Z-Fighters in general would just be a larger roster with people like Tapion, Zangia. I mean, at one point I kind of implied the rest of the Harrigan would kind of be redeemed or maybe turn good, so you kind of could just do that here. The androids, Majin Buu, a stronger Videl, and now the Gammas. Also again, this version of Pan, who would simply just be a monster. Oh, and then Broly and his gang too, and honestly probably Granola as well. And because of Trunten and Gotenks' view of things, one could even count the fusions. It's also less likely, mind you, for Goten and Trunks to fail their Metamor and fusion dances, and even if that risk remains, they could always use Potara, or maybe even the fusion bugs from the Demon Realm, to completely bypass that skill check. And not to mention Beast Gohan would still be fully possible here, and there wouldn't be any major need to use the scheme of Pan as motivation. Beyond that, because she could also likely already be able to fly and a great deal stronger than her canon herself, Pan would also just be in less danger overall. So even if I were to amp him and maybe even allow for a perfect Cell Max, in this timeline, Superhero, though it's interesting, is still too easy to actually deal with, moving us nearly instantly into its epilogue depicted by the manga, with Goku getting curious about the other Z-Fighters' training, and bringing everyone, likely including a great deal of names who originally didn't go, like Pan and the other Z-Fighters I mentioned for example, to Beerus' planet, in order to test their new forms and power in what are meant to be very simple, friendly, and casual spars. However, the stakes and intensity would be a lot higher, as on top of the canon matchups we received, like Goku testing the power of Ultra Instinct against Beast Gohan, we could also see a lot of other crazier dream matches just for the hell of seeing them, like that rematch of Gogeta and Trunten for example, though this time at a far higher level. Since being competitive, we could see them using things like the dreaded concept of an Ultra Ego x Ultra Instinct fusion, as you most certainly couldn't put that past this version of Gogeta. While in contrast, having witnessed them, I wouldn't put it past Trunten being able to pull off another copied first-time transformation that should largely be beyond him, but somehow he attains, in order to take on a beastly orange Trunten or Gotenks transformation, as they've now reached a height of synchronicity that allows them to swap between their fusions before the timer wears out completely, virtually giving the boys a way to remain fused forever by force of will, and even allowing them to show off things like Gotenks finally figuring out how to pull off his own ultimate form. Ramping up even further, Gohan could finally find his own fusion partner in Broly, and Trunten could cut loose adopting a great deal of the more creative techniques of his fusion brother, like the Super Ghost Kamikaze attack for example, eventually leading up to a battle royale involving the fusions of Goku, Vegeta, Trunks, and Goten, alongside the newly revealed wrathful beast Brohan. And while at it near the end, and just to be more extra, because of having learned the spirit fission technique from Vegeta, and wanting to know how strong all the Universe 7 Namekians could be together, after facing Moro, Salnel, and Melina, Piccolo could just as easily visit Namek really quickly, in order to fuse with all his people, and make a completely unified Orange Piccolo, since after helping Goku and Vegeta to rein Broly in, but not fighting the Wild Saiyan himself, as well as wanting to test the power of Gohan's rage boost feeding into Broly's wrath, but also simultaneously not wanting to let things get out of hand, as that just sounds dangerous, Piccolo and everyone else simply can't help themselves. And as it turns out, it was dangerous for all these fighters to go all out against one another like this, as they'd very much be beginning to approach gods of destruction fighting each other realms of power. Thus, in this timeline, the hiatus of Dragon Ball after the events and manga finale of Superhero could easily be explained by this crazy-ass sparring session doing a lot of damage to the universe, and quite possibly putting it at risk by destroying it, thus a hiatus of the manga. That is, if one needs a reason aside from the tragic passing of Akira Toriyama himself, putting the universe at risk or even destroying it, and thus leading to Whis needing to perform a temporal do-over, and Beerus to single out and lecture Piccolo, Goten, and Trunks as the ringleaders of all the insanity going on in this wacky universe. In all seriousness though, I hope you didn't mind me devolving into inane rambling at the end of the story, as I do believe the overall outcome of a timeline where Piccolo, or really anyone, spent any significant time and effort to train up Goten and Trunks, while interesting and very fun, would in the end more than likely result in a somewhat idealized timeline, kinda like this one. This one's a bit extreme, but idealized nonetheless. Could it be a bit more grounded if it maybe wasn't such a fusion and transformation bargain sale? Yes. But I digress. You wind up with a cast of characters so strong, they can put their own universe at risk with the strength of their undisciplined fused powers. But that, however, would also give them a higher height and a more perfect balance to try and achieve by going even further beyond together. And that's where we'll be ending this story. I hope you enjoy. Let me know what you thought, and what stories you're looking forward to next. As always, take care of yourselves and the world around you, and go beyond plus ultra. I'll see you guys next time on Dragon Ball.